Henry Hall.
(2016). Before we start, a few quick messages from the organizer. Number one, for your kind information, our official opening ceremony will be held at 10:30 this morning after the refreshment break. Secondly, notice for all poster presenters. For all poster presenters, please feel free to display your poster at your earliest convenience. It will be done in the exhibition hall. Please check in with the parallel session registration desk for fixtures. Next is from COL, the Commonwealth of Learning. COL is conducting a survey. This survey focuses on stakeholders' perception. It is the perceptions about ODL, Sustainable Development, and COL. A team of volunteers will canvass the questionnaires today. We request your cooperation in filling up these questionnaires. This is an addition to the feedback survey conducted by OUM. Now we move on with the first keynote speaker. This keynote address will be delivered by Mr. Martin Bean, Vice-Chancellor and President, RMIT Australia. The title is Technology and Innovation. For that, Yang Berbahagia Professor Datuk Dr. Shahrin bin Sahib alias Sahibuddin, Vice-Chancellor, University of Technical Malaysia, UTM, and Malaysian Government Advisor for E-Learning will chair the session. So without further ado, we invite Mr. Martin Bean and Yang Berbahagia Professor Datuk Shahrin to take their seats at the stage. Thank you.
Thank you to the chairperson. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good morning. Alhamdulillah, first of all, I would like to thank the organizer for inviting us this morning for the first keynote session. Bahagia Datuk, Tan Sri, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Indeed, it's a great pleasure for me to introduce our first speaker this morning to talk about technology and innovation. And I guess the key thing about e-learning for the past, I think, 20 to 30 years has been facing a lot of challenges, pitfalls, up and down. And I think we are now at the right moment as far as Malaysia is concerned, moving forward, especially in the adoption of MOOC recently by the Ministry of Higher Education. And we are indeed unique compared to the rest of the world, where the Ministry of Higher Education actually is pushing by choosing a platform to move forward and actually making it compulsory for the public universities to use that particular platform to deliver its learning. Ladies and gentlemen, our speaker this morning, I think most of us know him very well, and it's a great pleasure for me to introduce him. Mr. Martin G. Bean, CBE, is the Vice-Chancellor and President of RMIT in Australia. He previously held position as Vice-Chancellor of the Open University, the UK's largest academic institution and a global leader in provision of flexible learning. He was also the General Manager for Microsoft Worldwide Education Products Group and various executive leadership roles at Novell, and involved in integrating technology and learning systems. In 2012, Mr. Bean launched FutureLearn, the UK's first at-scale provider of massive open online courses, and in 2014, he was named one of the UK Prime Minister's Business Ambassador. He has won numerous awards in the US and UK for his contribution to education, and he was awarded the Commander of the Order of the British Empire, CBE, in 2015, United Kingdom New Year's Honours List, for services to higher education. Congratulations, Mr. Bean, for your recent award. And he has been also awarded by various other awarded an Honorary Doctor of Law from the University of London in 2013. And Mr. Bean has a Bachelor's of Education degree from the University of Technology, Sydney. He's a member of the Board of Governors of the Commonwealth of Learning. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Martin Bean.
Good. Well, good morning, everybody. It is an absolute pleasure to be here. I assume my microphone is working, because I'm going to do some wandering. Yes, I'm getting thumbs up. What a pleasure it is to be back with all of you. You know, I'm now down under in Australia, back in Melbourne. I don't get to spend as much time with all of my friends and colleagues, and it is just a pleasure to be here. My whole career has been, luckily, at the intersection of technology and education. I'm old enough to even say that's pre-personal computer and definitely pre-internet. And so I've sort of worked in all places around the world. I had the great honour to follow in Sir John's footsteps, to run a remarkable university, the Open University in the UK. And I often marvel, Sir John, as you know, that in the very beginning when the Open University was set up, we used that incredibly sophisticated state-of-the-art technology of the day known as a colour television to do our teaching, where actually we trained and educated more inebriated physicists than any other university on the planet, because the only thing on TV when the Brits got back from the pub was the Open University lectures. And the reason why I sort of set that as a backdrop, I thought yesterday's panel in the afternoon was fantastic, and it certainly brought to life many of the challenges of the proliferation of technology, those with access, those without. Indeed, all my time at Microsoft, working alongside the Gates Foundation, we spent tens of millions of dollars researching what was the great promise of technology in education. And what was interesting was we kept coming back over and over and over again that the great promise of technology was access. It was how could you scale access to high quality, affordable education. And so I unashamedly today am going to be talking about the march of technology, technology penetration, and what it's doing to university technology as a disruptive force. But I'm doing it very conscious of the fact that for many of you in the parts of the world that you operate in, the proliferation of the internet, broadband and computing technology is not the same in the places where I live now in Australia or where I lived in the UK or the United States. But I do it quite deliberately, because if we spend all of our time thinking about the proliferation of technology as it exists today, we will be blind to what in only a matter of years will be the proliferation of computing power and content throughout the world. And so my job at this conference, what Usher asked me to do, Professor Kanwar, was to come in here as an educational technologist and lay out what I believe the next most disruptive forces are going to be in the world, to provoke a conversation with all of us then as to, well, what will that mean? No matter what communities we serve, what will that mean for us moving forward? How do we unlock the power of education to drive access at affordable rates, because I don't think there's a person in this room, it was summed up brilliantly on the panel yesterday when it was said in the wrap-up remarks, let's leave nobody behind. And I'll guarantee you there are very few things in the world that can make that dream a reality, and technology is a very big part of making that dream a reality. So, I know I'll be provocative. I know there will be antibodies that rise in some of you as I present. Indeed, I expect you to squirm a little bit with some of the slides that I'm putting up, and if you do squirm, my job is done, because I'm not here to tell you what you want to hear. My job is to tell you what I think is going to happen, and I've been pretty good at it, haven't I, Sir John, over the years? I've been pretty good at predicting where this stuff is going to go. So before I do that, though, I'm going to give credit to a wonderful man, Michael Moe, who actually runs or is part of an organisation called GSV. They run a conference every year with Arizona State University in the United States. He's a venture capitalist. He invests almost exclusively in educational technology. Why do I go to that conference? Well, it actually is my window on an annual basis to where the money is going in educational technology. And usually, if you follow the money in educational technology, you'll have a pretty good idea about where the trends are going. So I want to thank Michael for allowing me to use some of his material in the presentation today. All right, everybody, I want you to stop for a minute and think about where you were a long time ago, 2010. All right, just pause for a moment. Remember where you were this time in 2010. All right, so not that long ago. And I want to just take you on a little technology journey. Will you indulge me for a moment? So in 2010, President Obama has just been sworn in, and we are still rocked by the collapse, the global financial crisis. As suddenly many of the things we took for granted started crumbling around our ears. There's not a single person in this room in one way, shape or form, or the communities we serve, that weren't affected by that. It was also the year that the very first iPad was released, 2010. The first Uber ride was still 2 months away. There wasn't even Uber in 2010, and Snapchat in 2011 was invented. So we've moved on a year in 2011. 8 billion videos per day on Snapchat. From not even being in existence in 2011 to 8 billion videos per day. And as Professor Tynan mentioned yesterday, video is the new medium. The #1 search engine in the world is not Google, it's YouTube. The #1 thing people search for when they go to YouTube is, how can I? They go to learn. They go to learn, and they go through the new medium, and the new medium is video, what I've been calling for years, rich content. Rich content. Rich content that underpins much of the success of the UK's Open University from the very beginning, with our lineage with the BBC. We understood the power of rich content. So it was also in 2011, a little thing called Airbnb was just starting to get their first funding to get going. Today, 80 million nights booked in 2015 on Airbnb. And if you look at investment in educational technology, in 2010 there was about $550 million invested in educational technology. In 2015 there was $2.1 billion at a 31% compound average growth rate. So anybody that thinks the technology and the investment in educational technology has sort of stood still is sadly mistaken. It's accelerating at an exponential growth. 2012, I like to think of it as the year of the MOOC. Here you have the founders of, and it was interesting yesterday how many times that little acronym got mentioned, both formally and informally, in Professor Kanwar's introduction to this conference. She speaks at length around the impact and the opportunity of MOOCs. In 2012 they started, and they've had over 18 million students study just with Coursera. The MOOC provider that I started, FutureLearn, well over 5 million people studying inside that environment now. And let's pause for a moment, because there's always a harsh critique of every innovation. There's been a lot of harsh critique of MOOCs, but ladies and gentlemen, these numbers are staggering. And many of these programs are extraordinary, with incredible outcomes for individuals, and many of whom never would have had the opportunity to participate. And there were a lot of myths shared on the panel yesterday. There are more women studying in FutureLearn than men. Beware the seduction of the early naysayers. You know, I really like Amara's law. Amara's law says we have a tendency to overestimate the impact of technology in the short term and underestimate the impact in the medium to long term. Just because the MOOCs in 12 months didn't put every university on the planet out of business doesn't mean that they've gone away, and it doesn't mean that they aren't having an incredible impact on our ability to scale high quality educational outcomes. You know, I despair, ladies and gentlemen, with people that try to say, you know, compare classroom learning here and e-learning here and drawing parallels, because you know what? There is fantastic teaching face-to-face, and there's lousy teaching face-to-face. There's fantastic teaching digitally enabled, and there's lousy teaching digitally enabled. Do you know what our goal has been, needs to be, always must be? It's got to be about great teaching. How do we use whatever mode, whatever resources, whatever technology we have, whatever is in existence, to scale the best possible educational experiences that we have? Some of the work I'm most proud of that we did in the Open University in the UK while I was there includes the work we did along with the BBC in Bangladesh in English language training, English in action, where we used a Java feature phone and a micro SD card to distribute the content directly into mobile phones for teachers, where the teacher lesson plans were shown on video. You could plug a speaker into that phone and the audio lessons could be played in the classroom. I'm incredibly proud of our teacher education in Sub-Saharan Africa program, where we used technology where it was available, when people could come to the colleges and get access to the websites and resources, but then we produced those resources in analogue formats that could be taken back into the classrooms when technology wasn't present. And so again, I want to encourage everybody that wants to wallow in what's wrong and what doesn't work with these amazing megaphones of education, and start thinking about, if we take advantage of them, what the possibilities are for our homes, our communities, and for the people sitting in the front row, our nations. So if we look at MOOC enrolments from 2011, where they were just beginning, 2012 is when they hit an acceleration point, 194% compound average growth rate. 2015 exceeded 35 million enrolments. So now let's look at what's gone on with the cost of computing. Just about everybody in this room, I'd predict more than 98%, have got a weapon of mass distraction on them right now in some form or another. At least 64% of you will be incapable of stroking it at least once during my remarks today. But for those of you that are worried about the cost of technology, just look at what's happened from 2000 to 2015. There's been a 98% decline in the cost of computing. When you look at the cost of storage, a 99% decline. Back in 2000, storage was a big deal. I was working in the sector and it was a really big deal to figure out how could you scale storage around the world. Now we take it for granted. I wandered up with 2 USB flash drives today that if I lost them as I walked out of here, I wouldn't even think about it, because it is just so inexpensive now. If you look at internet access, in 2000, 371 million. Today, 3.1 billion people have access to the internet. When you look at broadband access, 60 million to 2.3 billion. And when you look at PC penetration, from 180 million to 1.4 billion. Most interestingly though, if you look at mobile penetration in the year 2000, about 740 million. Now, best guess, about 7 billion mobile devices in operation around the world. Do you realize that in 2000, there were really 0 smartphones? There were a few really ugly, clunky devices around that I didn't count, but the smartphones as we know them today, there was 0. And think about this, 2.6 billion of them around the world now. And when you think that in 2000, there was 0 app downloads. Just think about the change, the proliferation, the impact that that has had in our lives the lives of our children, the lives of our families, communities, and nations. And again, I'm putting all of these statistics up in some ways to challenge you to not stand still in the world of penetration today, but just imagine this acceleration will continue, and as it continues, how much computing power and access will be in people's pockets over the next 10 years. App downloads today, 226 billion apps have been downloaded since they were launched. So what does it all mean? Shift happens. That's what it all means. And that's my big contention, is that for all of us, the leaders in education, for all of us, the leaders in thinking about the role of innovation and technology, the real challenge is not to think about what we can do today with today's level of technology and proliferation. It's to dream what can happen if we think beyond. The best example of that I can give you is the Aptus device that was developed by the Commonwealth of Learning, who didn't just sit there and bemoan the fact that one of the barriers to open educational resources was that you needed access to the internet. They figured out a way at very low cost. How could you put the internet into any school that wanted it without being connected to the web? That was a group of people that didn't worry about what the technology and the penetration was today. They dreamed big thoughts, they used their imagination, they were innovative, they used the technology of the day, and they dramatically scaled access to high quality open education resources. It's that type of thinking, that dreaming big, that understanding of what could be rather than what is, that will allow, as we talked about on the panel yesterday, that dream of leaving nobody behind to become a reality. But we've got some real challenges. My contention, ladies and gentlemen, is these very sad political events that are going on around the world right now are largely being driven by jobs and inclusiveness. They're being driven by the fact that we're seeing now a shift in our societies and communities where it's no longer a given that if you go to school, you get an education, you have aspiration, you'll get a job, you'll have a meaningful role in the household and your community, and your family can lead a better lifestyle than the one you had. And if you dig into Brexit, if you dig into the recent election in the United States of America, if you look at what's going on in other elections around the world right now, a lot of it comes down to people really coming to grips with the impact that technology and other forces have had on the next generation's ability to engage with society in meaningful ways. And they are trends that we all need to think about deeply if we're responsible for what the education system needs to look like to be relevant everywhere in the world. I like this quote from Paul Krugman. I think it's quite interesting. We could be looking at a society in which all the gains in wealth accrue to whoever owns the robots. In America, 50% of jobs are at risk of replacement in the next 20 years. And if you look at this simple chart and look at, from a knowledge, skills and abilities perspective, what's going on with computers versus what's going on with humans, you start to see that acceleration of computing technology to do things that we thought were only capable of being done by human beings it's not a fair fight. We just simply cannot develop ourselves as rapidly as we're developing the information communication technology. And the sad reality that many of the developed nations around the world are running into, and where much of the scaremongering has come from, and much of the headline politics that we've seen comes from, is that the reality is automation eats jobs. It also creates an incredibly different type of job and future for all of our economies, but it's eating the jobs of the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and the early part of the 1980s. And that's troubling people, and it's incredibly confronting for us who work in higher education or tertiary education. And let me give you some examples. Once upon a time, AT&T, king of the world when it came to communication and collaboration. Along came Facebook, and in the blink of an eye, replaced them. The same goes for big hotel chains like the Marriott, with Airbnb eclipsing them without even owning a hotel room. So it goes for energy with Selexil dominating now organisations like ExxonMobil. But look at education. We're still, for all the work, all the effort, all that we've gone through, the innovation in education is still very shallow, ladies and gentlemen. I can still walk in, as much as I've tried in my 2 years in my new university, I can still walk into rooms like this almost at a daily basis and stand at the back of the room and see somebody teaching in almost exactly the same way as I was taught when I went to university in the early 1980s. I had a 12-year-old boy once describe, this is when I was at Microsoft, once described going to school as being like being on an aeroplane. And I said, what do you mean, Matthew? And he said, well, you have to sort of sit down, you've got to put all your trust and confidence at somebody at the front that you don't really know, and you have to turn off all your electronic devices. And I thought that was such a wonderful way for that young man to talk about how the education system had failed to keep pace with the world that he was living in. And that was quite some time ago. And yes, we've seen the proliferation of technology. Yes, we've seen schools now that, celebrate and allow for the use of computing devices on a daily basis. But some of the fundamentals of education, the way we produce content, instructional design, the way we assess, oh my goodness, we're just in the dark ages around what could be done from an innovative perspective. And that's a problem. It's a big problem. Because, as Professor Tynan mentioned on her panel yesterday, I think we're at our Uber moment. And it doesn't matter what nation or community you work in around the world, the way we think about the value proposition of education is breaking down. And there is an exponential opportunity for all of us if we exploit that gap. If you look at the rise of value and you look at the innovation over time, boy, it's a wonderful time. I do not believe there has ever been a better time, if you believe in open education, than right now. Because for the longest time, those of us who believed in open education, we were that strange little creature that sat off to the side, that people sort of indulged and said it's really important and access is necessary. But now we are right in the middle. We are right in the middle. In 2012, when some of the best branded universities in the world started giving away their courses for free, there was this fundamental shift. Of course, for many of us, we were like, what's the big deal? We've been doing that since 1972. But the big deal was, it was no longer us off to the side. It had suddenly mainstreamed and everything that we do. And trust me, when the web arrives, because it's really about the internet, when the web arrives, there's great brands, there's lots of money, and there's lots of people. It never goes away. It never gives up. It twists, it changes. Some that were are not there in the end, but it never ever goes away. And that's where I think we are right now. I want to just give one example. Augmented and virtual reality. Augmented and virtual reality. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that. Here's the way we often think of it. A student sitting in isolation, just their eyes being opened to a world like never before. And by the way, for those of you distressed at how much those goggles cost that are strapped to that young woman's face, with a little thing called Google Cardboard, you can now produce the equivalent device for around $3 US. I think give it a year or two, we'll have that down to about $1.50. So don't get caught up with the expense of what's strapped to this young woman's face, but start thinking about this. I loved this picture because this is no longer, an individual isolated. This is a group of people in a gymnasium with virtual and augmented reality coming to life for them and transforming it. And I know for many in the room, there was an interesting debate on the panel yesterday about content. Everything I have ever studied in education tells me the richer the content, the more immersive, the more experiential, the greater the learning, the greater the retention, the greater the outcomes. I would love to have a debate with anybody in the room afterwards about whether the textbook 4-year refresh cycle is fit for purpose in a world when everybody has the computing power that they have in their pockets. Now, I thought augmented and virtual reality was going to take decades to transform and proliferate into all of our households, and then along came Pokemon Go. And Pokemon Go, in the blink of an eye, ladies and gentlemen, took augmented reality from a nice idea that some of us were thinking about and created a phenomena. So much so that it actually lifted Nintendo's market cap almost overnight above Sony Corporation, an organisation that has been in all of our lives for decades and decades. And it really is a phenomenon. It's growing at 176% compound average growth rate. By the year 2018, it will be a $5.2 billion industry, and its application for education is extraordinary. It is extraordinary. I turned on CNN last night in my room, CNN News, and there was an amazing piece done on human trafficking, where a very interesting NGO had developed an immersive virtual reality experience of walking in the shoes of somebody being human trafficked. And they talked to the person that had gone through the experience afterwards. And what she described in the emotional connection and understanding of human trafficking that she had by actually walking in the shoes through virtual reality was, even to me, I just couldn't believe the impact that it had. And so again, when you think about not what is, but what's possible, it even makes video look a little passé. It makes video look like yesterday's news when you start thinking about the possibility of augmented and virtual reality. So here's my contention, ladies and gentlemen. So you've got the world of work being disrupted. You've got automation eating jobs. You've got disenfranchised youth and others in our communities that are rising up and rebelling out of nostalgia about sort of the post-industrial revolution world coming to an end and this new world taking over and not sure about where they'll go and what they do. And what has always been the answer to that? What has always been the answer in our communities when shift happens? Who wins and who loses? Well, I'll tell you who wins. Those that win when there's a shift in our society are those that shift their education system along with it to keep pace. Those that have the courage to understand that if you stop walking in the shoes of the way we want to teach, what I call supply side thinking, and start walking in the shoes of what the new world of work wants and demands from people to be employed and to lead meaningful lives, if we don't have the courage to recognise the shift that's taking place, we will fail. We will fail those citizens that need us as the agents of change to equip them for the new world of work to drive their homes, their communities, their economies and the world forward in meaningful ways. And the recent political events show you what happened when we abdicate our role and responsibility for stepping in and creating an education system that prepares people for the new world of work. This is the old system. I get to play from 0 to 5. I get to learn from 5 to 25. I have a job from 25 to 65. And then supposedly I get to retire and go back and play again. That's my theory anyway. The new system looks something like this, folks. Play, school, job. Career change, career change, career change, which means those buzzwords that we've used since about 1982 about lifelong learning now no longer are a have to be able to learn for life. They actually become a life imperative. And that means we as education systems and institutions, we have to stop thinking about just having that little piece of the pie called school. And we now need to start thinking about what are we doing for our citizens for life. It's why open education resources are so important. It's why MOOCs are so important. It's why micro-credentials are so important. And it's why we've got to change. It's not about us being nostalgic and staying in a world where we don't change. Because, folks, the statistics say that my children won't have 15 jobs in their lifetime. They'll have 15 careers they will need to change careers 15 times to be able to lead a meaningful life. And it's not just constrained to the developed world at all. In fact, when you look at the fact that for many developing nations, they skipped copper and went straight to digital and satellite, it's going to accelerate even more. And if you look at what employers are saying, PricewaterhouseCoopers, they call themselves PwC now, recently announced that they're no longer, when they do their interviewing for graduates to enter their organisation, they're going to mask the university they studied at, and they're going to mask what they studied, because they've got no evidence that that correlates to productivity for them. These are the competencies they're looking for: adaptability, learn to learn, entrepreneurship, communication, empathy, critical thinking, and grit. Grit, resilience, we hear over and over again. So in addition to just teaching courses and subjects, it's the role of tertiary institutions now to think about how do we teach these horizontal competencies to map not to the way we want to teach and assess, but to where the world of work is going. And for universities like mine, I unashamedly say that my job, my university's job, is to get our students ready for life and work. That's what we do. 98% of my students come to me to get ready for life and work. And this is what employers are telling me you need to have to be ready for life and work. So what does it mean? Well, I'm an economist originally. I'm a bit of a failed economist, but that's another story. But we need to start thinking about knowledge as a currency. And here's the way you can sort of look at it. There's information. That's the way sort of Google, as you can think of Google. We've got access to almost the entire sum of human knowledge in our pocket. That gentleman up there is just accessing it right now while we speak. But on the other end of the spectrum, we've had what we've thought about as knowledge. Ah, yes, this is the Harvard crest. You go to Google for information, but of course, you go to Harvard for knowledge, because it comes with all of the other things, including student debt that goes with it. But you come to Harvard. But look how messy the world is getting, folks. Look how messy the world is getting, because there is no such thing as just information and knowledge anymore. It's all breaking down. When I first launched FutureLearn, I had a slide. I didn't put it in here because many of you have seen it, but I said from day one, the great disruption of the MOOCs to formal education was going to be at the intersection of credit, non-credit bearing and credit bearing. And so it is coming to pass. The whole way we think about credit and awards is starting to be challenged. Because quite frankly, folks, and this is pretty controversial for a lot of people in the room, I actually think the old currency, which is fast breaking down, is the degree, the award, the diploma. These neat little units of consumption that we on the supply side love to sell in 2, 3 and 4 years, and we think it'll never be assailed. People are always going to want to come to us for continuous blocks of time to get their award or degree. But actually what's going on and what the world of work wants and needs and what our citizens need to be relevant for their life is they need a knowledge portfolio. And it's not to say that those degrees aren't really important, but what it does say is they're not enough. And indeed, we need to start thinking about breaking them down and making them consumable in different ways to get people from learning into the labour market and back again in much more rapid cycles than we ever have before. And that brings me to the rise of the micro-credential. Still pretty stealthy, but it's bubbling away. The Mozilla Foundation, they put a lot of money into digital badging. These are micro-credentials that could be digitally searched. One statistic I saw recently said that somebody with a micro-credential is searched 11 more times in LinkedIn than somebody with a degree. Why? Because they're short, sharp, and tightly aligned to labour market deficits and often carry the badge or attributes of an employer to go along with them. And what we're seeing now is some really innovative steps towards the micro-credentials leading into meso-credentials into higher education. In other words, people getting advanced standing through the micro and meso-credentials and them being articulated into higher education and vocational education programs and courses. Then people get out into the world of work, and guess what? They go back down again to consume the micro-credentials, and so it will be for their life. And so it was very interesting to me when I was working recently with the government of Singapore to see how much they are embracing the notion of micro-credentials backed by industry and education as the way forward to get people who are in sunsetting industries back into sunrise industries through what they're doing. And a great example that I'll give you, everybody's probably heard of edX. It's the MOOC provider that was started between MIT and Harvard. Well, if 2012 was the year of the MOOC, 2016 is the year of the micro-credential. Now, it's still a little clunky. They're figuring it out. But what they've done with their Micro Masters program that was launched in September of this year, open to anyone, 14 highly ranked university partners, master's level courses, all about bridging the gap between education and the workplace. You've got fields such as global business management, user experience, and artificial intelligence. And it's a pathway to an accelerated master's degree. You can do this free, open education, and then you can cash it in to one of those universities for advanced standing, credit, shorter time, lower costs. Ladies and gentlemen, think of it as the starter gun. Just as the MOOCs were opening up the content in the universities, think about what edX has done as the starter gun for what I see as now the disruption of credit and the breaking down of the unit of educational consumption, because this is the world we're heading towards. This is the world. It's a world where people are going to take responsibility for their own education, to gain qualifications both formally and informally, deposit them in portfolios with digital badges. LinkedIn and whoever will follow LinkedIn will be the marketplace of education. Employers will arrive there saying, this is what I want. Individuals will arrive there with digital credentials saying, this is what I've got. Won't matter where they live, where they came from. If they can prove they're competent and capable, they'll get the job. Jobs always win. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin, for the quick overview of what's coming. I do not want to summarize things. I think he talked about the shift moments. We are now at the juncture of the Uber moments for technology and innovation in education. So he also mentioned about the exponential opportunity, knowledge as currency, and also the rise of the micro-credential. And I think he ended by saying about the destruction of the credits. Excellencies, honorable ministers, ladies and gentlemen, we have a few more moments for Q&A. I would like to invite anybody with some quick questions. Please come forward. We have around about almost 10 minutes before we have to give way to the next session. Please, anybody with a question? Yes, go ahead. Can we have a mic for the question?
So thank you. The question was, will today's sessions be available? Because I spoke too quickly and you couldn't capture everything that I said. And I'm sure, Professor Kanwar, that's the case. Yes, we have multiple video cameras, so we look forward to it. Can I ask you, sir, while people are stopping being shy, asking me a question, what did you find most thought-provoking from my presentation? Thank you very much, Your Excellency. So the comment was, what he found most intriguing by my presentation was sort of the disjuncture between the classroom and the world of work. And indeed, the thing that keeps me awake the most at night as a university with 89,000 students now is how do I actually scale bringing industry and embedding it in everything that we do? Because I have a university that has always been about very industry focused, embedded with industry. But the more students you have, the greater the challenge is to be able to do that in scalable ways. So I'm very glad that it gave you that pause, and it's very nice to meet you. All right, I think we have...
question at the back.
Great, thank
Please,
you.
Madam.
Yes, I have a question about quality and standards, which with such a range of providers, how do you guarantee a certain set of standards so the learner is well served?
Thank you. I wish there was ever a guarantee about standards in any type of education. I went to a fantastic top-ranked university in Melbourne. Man, I had some miserable teaching. I mean, really bad. So I think the first thing we need to recognise are there's no guarantees in life, and actually there's some pretty miserable education that goes on inside institutions where you would expect there not to be miserable education. And I think it's important to do that because often we compare innovative ways of delivering education to what we think is perfect with the system that we've got, and it's anything but perfect. What I like about technology, particularly in some of these more free and open areas, is if you actually use reputation engines to actually allow the user to decide for themselves and employers to decide for themselves whether it was valuable, that's probably the best indicator of quality that you can have from education. Now, you certainly need to have trust and confidence in the rigour of what's being taught, but the minute Wikipedia came along, trust went out the window. Most people go to Wikipedia and expect and just think it's the truth. No, the Wikipedia is what was on somebody's mind over the last week and a few other people that contributed. So I actually think one of the critical skills that we should be teaching our citizens to ensure quality is the ability to actually triangulate information and interrogate information to decide for themselves what meaning actually is and what quality actually is. But I do think the use of reputation engines, just like we do in every other part of our life, if you go to TripAdvisor or you go to Airbnb or for the Uber users in the room, being able to see what others thought is a very, very powerful mechanism, particularly when the numbers get quite large. And it's not perfect, but it never is. And I don't know if there are members of quality agencies in the room, national or regional, but I don't think it's about rules and regulations either. I just think rules and regulations will tie people in knots. So not perhaps what you wanted to hear, but that's the way I look at it.
Any more questions? Yes, we have one question. A few at the back, the gentleman there, please.
If you've got questions too, there's standing microphones, I think, that they get you to line up at. So here we go. Hi.
A quick one.
Hello. As of technology is concerned, whatever you said, there is not much disagreement, but the issue is that to avail or harness the power of technology, one needs high-speed internet access or at least some respectable speed of internet. I am speaking about the bandwidth. In a lot of countries, there is a lot of interest for MOOCs, and they are being launched also. But the problem is the people, I mean the students or the interested learners, they don't have access to internet. And governments, rather than focusing on providing internet services, they are focusing on offering MOOCs. It's just a simple idea which I am floating. Just like massive open online courses have come, is it possible that we also think of a massive open offline courses? Okay, the MOOC which is being offered needs to reach in offline mode also in some way to the people, because developing countries are always developing. They are not becoming developed.
No, I've got it. And you can imagine in my career how many times I've heard what you just said. So let me give you a couple of examples to help you. Thank you very much. The Aptus technology that I talked about that Commonwealth of Learning has developed, it's on display and is at this conference. If you haven't seen it, go look at it, because it is exactly what you just said, sir. It's the ability to have the internet in the classroom without needing to be connected to broadband or the internet. And it is about MOOCs offline, which I think is fantastic. It's a great way of describing it, and it's very, very low cost. So, Balaji, the Aptus device now, what have you got it down to now? 120. Is that Canadian or US? Oh, US, all right. It was Canadian. I was going to say it was even cheaper, but yes. So it's getting cheaper, and that's for a whole classroom or virtually school, depending upon the device that you're working with. Another fantastic example, I believe I've got some colleagues here from IIT in India who have come up with they looked at it and said, you know what? There's colour televisions in just about all of the places we need to get to. And guess what there also is? There's a satellite dish sitting on the roof. So we need to get rich content out there. What we're going to do is leverage bandwidth from a satellite that we'll put up in orbit, and that gives us a downlink then, just as Sir John and I did with the BBC, to all of that amazing rich content into places that it wasn't before. And the list goes on. In many ways, your question is the premise of my entire talk, which is don't focus on the barrier, focus on the way around the barrier, and recognise that with the plethora of amazing open education resources, just figure out a way to get it proliferate at low cost and magic will happen. Does that help?
Okay, go ahead. The
Okay.
gentleman at the mic, please.
I just was wondering about the previous question. The whole world talks about MOOC, which is video. There are options available to have an audio MOOC for humanities and social sciences, and which needs very less bandwidth, can be reached in a mobile phone, and we can also integrate it with the PowerPoint. Why not think of an audio-only MOOC?
I think it's a fantastic idea. Podcasts are just so popular in the world. And yeah, and in fact, all the work that I've done says that certainly video lecture is very low value. Audio is just as good. Where you want to use the video is to bring to life concepts that you can't do with your mouth, because otherwise audio is fine. In fact, you never would want to put me on a video. People would turn off. So you're better off just having the audio. So I think your point is very valid. And I think the meta point is there's an expression in English which is horses for courses. It's use whatever content makes sense given the constraints that you have, because undoubtedly video requires more bandwidth and storage.
We have another question from front.
Hello.
Please. Can we have a mic?
You're welcome.
Thank you. I'll say thank you very much for that lecture. It was really, eye-opener. As a Minister of Education in Botswana, I tried to place myself within that whole, spectrum, and I kind of failed, but that's okay. I just wanted to, maybe a comment from you about the relevance and role of open, online, and flexible learning to the young learner, to the primary school child, the challenges, the opportunities, and what do you see as the future classroom and future 5 years, future 10 years, future 15 years? Thank you very much.
Well, we may have to have a coffee later on to explore that, Minister. I think open education resources are just as valuable and just as relevant for primary and secondary students as they are for tertiary students. There was a wonderful comment on the panel yesterday, which was, rang true with me, which is, well, if I give you a television, but there's no programs, what's the value of the television? The value is in the content in the program. And in many places in the world that I've worked where teacher shortages or qualified teacher shortages were the biggest barriers to actually scaling primary and secondary education, the rigour associated with building fit-for-purpose open education resources that actually enabled a teacher who may not be a subject matter expert but could teach to bring to life concepts is incredibly powerful. My personal opinion is the classroom of the future won't be defined by the beautiful walls and rooms and too much air conditioning, but will be actually defined by, as it's always been all the way back to Aristotle, it will come back to the power and the quality of the teacher, not to know everything, but to know how to use all of that content and bring it to life for their students in meaningful ways and ask great questions. So I don't think it's about nation after nation us ploughing billions of dollars into necessarily building palaces. I'd be spending that money on teachers, and I'd be helping those teachers understand how to interrogate a world when all the content is available to them, and understand how to build those lessons in meaningful ways. Because every nation that I've worked in on the planet, typically what holds us back is great content and great teachers. That's what holds us back. OER will take care of the content. It's our job to take care of the teachers.
One last question, please. Quick one. We have about 2 minutes left before we have to stop. Yes, please, the gentleman in front.
I'll repeat it for you. Oh, no. You're now 2 microphones approaching you. There we go.
I need only one. Thank you. Hearing you, Martin, we feel that the mismatch between demand and supply of labor shouldn't be there. Unfortunately, I think ministers and all the policymakers around going back home still suffer from one of the major issues of demand and supply of labor. What are the 3 things would you recommend to all the policymakers and ministers around to reduce that?
Oh my goodness, if I had the answer to that, I'd go work for the New York Times and make a fortune, but I'll give it a shot. I'll give it a shot. So the first thing I would say is focus on where the jobs are going to be rather than where they are. And we spend way too much time, I think, trying to get people back into jobs that are obsolete. So that would be number 1. Number 2, for the ministers and policy leaders in the room, I've never seen a labour market mismatch solved without a strategy. Very quickly, when North Carolina in the United States, they used to make all of their money out of growing tobacco. And when tobacco plummeted because people, to a large degree in the United States, stopped smoking, they were caught short. Now, they could have simply allowed their community to die. But what they did was bring their policymakers, their politicians, their primary and secondary schools, and their tertiary education, community colleges and higher education together. And they said, what do we want to focus on? They said high-tech and nanotech. And they brought the whole system together, and then they sent their economic development people off to go and woo major corporations to come, put their headquarters in North Carolina, their manufacturing in North Carolina. And why did they come? They came because employers could see a ready supply of cost-effective labour to support their growth and innovation moving forward. So number 1 is to make sure you're looking at the jobs of the future. Number 2 is have a plan. Number 3 is bring your education system together to recognise that they have to teach contemporary content in contemporary ways, much more aligned to listening to what industry needs from their workers of the future instead of what they've been teaching for decades before. There you go, there's 3.
I think that's fair enough.
Is that fair enough? Okay.
I think we're just about to finish our time slot. I think we should give a big round of applause.
It's been my great pleasure. Thank you.
Pleasure, Henry. I will pass back the session to the chairperson. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Now we invite Yang Berbahagia, Professor Insinyur Dr. Rosli Hamid, Vice President for Development, Open University Malaysia, to present the token of appreciation to our chairperson, Professor Datuk Dr. Shahrin, and our speaker, Mr. Martin Bain. Thank you, Yang Berbahagia Professor Insinyur Dr. Rosli Hamid, Yang Berbahagia Professor Datuk Dr. Shahrin, and Mr. Martin Bain. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now take a break. All guests and participants are invited to have some refreshments served just outside the conference area.